I welcome you all to this talk, Digital Sovereignty and Why Open Infrastructure Matters. My name is Eduard Itrich. I'm working for the Open Source Business Alliance. The Open Source Business Alliance is a German association of more than 200 companies and organizations in the open source ecosystem. I'm working as a community manager for the Sovereign Cloud Stack project. I will give you a brief introduction to the Sovereign Cloud Stack project later on, but first of all, we really need to talk. If you follow recent political discussions and product pitches, I'm sure you have heard of the term digital sovereignty. Digital sovereignty everywhere. You can find this term in like every pitch, in every political discussion, and this term is actually highly hyped and misused. If we look at the basic concept of digital sovereignty and what some organizations are trying to define by digital sovereignty, is just operating proprietary software locally in a specific jurisdiction. And for example, if you follow the recent cloud discussions in Germany and Europe, you can find various notions of digital sovereignty in regards of the Azure stack that will be operated by SAP and Avato and other projects that actually try to operate proprietary software in a local space. So let's step back and let's talk about what is digital sovereignty, but what is sovereignty at all? And the hype about the term sovereignty is not new. And people already have argued about sovereignty ages ago. We can find a very good quote by Oppenheim from 1912, who stated that there exists perhaps no conception, the meaning of which more controversial than that of sovereignty. And that there is no conception from the moment when it was introduced into political science until now has ever had a meaning which was universally agreed upon. So, what is sovereignty? If you try to find a definition that can, although the meaning of sovereignty has varied throughout history and across scientific disciplines, the core meaning of sovereignty can be condensed to supreme authority within a territory. And if we follow a very good paper from Couture and Toupin, we can find this definition, because the notion of territory does not need to be restricted to the landmass, but also to resources lying on the territory, such as, for example, human infrastructures. And in recent time, I guess you all are aware of the two very prominent examples of sovereignty, food and energy. But what about digital sovereignty? What can be defined by digital sovereignty? What does it mean that a state, people are sovereign in the digital realm? We believe that digital sovereignty is more than just legal compliance. And we have identified 4 steps to become truly sovereign in the digital realm. Well, on the bottom we have the legal dimension, and we have very good examples of how the European Data Act is trying to get a very good floor for digital sovereignty, but there is more than just legal compliance. On top of that, we have the freedom of choice. So I, as a customer, I, as a user, I am able to choose between different alternatives. But is that all? No. Actually, there is also a technological dimension. So I need to be able to look into the code, to have the 4 freedoms of open source, to be able to modify the code, to be able to share the code, and to be able to use it freely. But that's not all. On top of that, we have the dimension of competence. So actually, even if the source code is freely available, I need to be able to run that code, to be able to operate at scale, and to deliver supreme quality and high secure offerings. So let's get through these 4 steps step by step and look at them in depth. So let's ask ourselves, even if data is processed and stored solely in a specific jurisdiction, for example, Germany or Europe, isn't there still a strong dependency on a single software vendor? And this is where we get to the second step. We add alternatives. So I can choose between different offerings. For example, I can choose between different companies selling me the same software, the same proprietary software, but at least I can choose within the ecosystem who will operate my software, who will try to consult me, and I have the freedom of choosing between different alternatives and not being locked into a single vendor. But even if I can choose between different offerings, how can I influence the future evolution of the software I am using? And this is where open source comes into play. Open source enables us to influence the future of software, to use it, to share it, and to evolve it. And if we follow the recent discussions, we have seen some companies that already understood that open source software enables digital sovereignty. But are we done yet? No, because I have already talked about the 4 layers to digital sovereignty. Even if I can inspect, use, modify, and share the software, how can I contribute to design decisions? How can I contribute to the upstream code? How can I participate in discussions? How can I merge pull requests? And so on and so on. And this is where the Fantastic Four come into play. The Open Infrastructure Foundation have defined the 4 opens, which are open source, open design, open development, and open community. Because the software is open sourced, this must not mean that I, as a user, can somehow influence the software project and the evolution of the project. How can I contribute to discussions or to the code base? And how can I bring in my issues? How can I bring in my perspective as a stakeholder? So to have open projects, we need to foster an open community that embraces an open development and an open design, and this on top of open source. So it's not enough to just use open source software. We need to rely on projects that embrace open communities, that embrace an open development process by making open design decisions. And are we done yet? No, because actually, even if I can participate in the community developing the software, how the heck am I supposed to operate this stack at scale? And operational knowledge is something that is kept secret like a holy grail by many, many companies, and they try to benefit from the knowledge they gather inside the company. But how is this stable for the future? How can we, as a society, foster open technology, open infrastructure in an increasingly complex IT system, in a highly competitive market for skilled people? How can we operate digital offerings in a self-determined, secure, and qualitative excellent manner? And the answer to this question must be the collectivization of operational knowledge, just as it is being practiced for many years with software code. For more than 40 years, we have open source software projects, but the same must apply to operational knowledge. And if you're curious into this last step to digital sovereignty, if you're curious to learn more about open operation, I can highly recommend you to visit 2 resources. First of all, as a community, inside the Sovereign Cloud Stack project, we are working on a concept of open operations. You can find a manifesto that is actually a work in progress on openoperations.org, where we have collected various arguments why we need to embrace operational knowledge, why we need to open operational knowledge, why we need to embrace the freedom of operational knowledge. And I can also recommend you a second resource tomorrow. My colleague Christian, actually not Felix, he is sick, but Christian will give a talk on open operations. So join his session tomorrow at the same time, 3 p.m. In the Silcher-Saal to learn more about open operations and why it is very important that we as a society, as an open source community, need to foster operational knowledge and to share operational knowledge and to build communities of practice. What we actually have learned is that it takes more to true digital sovereignty, more than just building up the layer of legal dimension. We need the freedom of choice to choose between alternatives. We have the technological dimension. We need to have open source, to look into the code, to inspect it, to share it, to modify the code, and to use it freely. But on top of that, we need the dimension of competence. So we need operational knowledge in a freely and transparent manner, just the same as we did with software code 40 years ago. You can read more about the topic of the 4 layers of digital sovereignty in the cloud report under the report.cloud. My colleagues Kurt, Felix and I wrote some articles about digital sovereignty in the sovereignty in the digital realm and the 4 layers and why they are important for us as a society and the open source community. So if somebody states that operating proprietary software in a specific jurisdiction and this will enable digital sovereignty, just say no. Speak out that it just takes more than building the legal dimension, but it takes open source technology, open operational knowledge, and alternatives to the actual hype that is being fostered by the discussion around digital sovereignty. We need to demystify digital sovereignty and actually embrace open technology hosted by an open community with open operational knowledge. I already mentioned that I'm working for the Open Source Business Alliance. The Open Source Business Alliance hosts a project called Sovereign Cloud Stack, which is funded by the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. We, as an open source community, try to build on the same pillars that I already mentioned. We define standards in an open design decision, in an open process with an open community. We implement the standards in an open reference implementation built truly on open source software. And last but not least, and this is very important for us as a community, we embrace open operationals. So we built a community of operators, of cloud service providers, of teams all over the world that join forces to share operational knowledge and work together to build communities of practice to solve the problems that all companies are actually facing instead of keeping this operational knowledge as holy grail inside the company. Our community consists of several companies, some very known companies, some smaller business organizations within the cloud field. And this community tries to build a multi-cloud software stack built on standards in an open reference implementation that enables freedom in the sense of digital sovereignty I already mentioned. So we have several open source cloud stacks defined and implemented by the Sovereign Cloud Stack project. They're interconnected and users are actually able to use the resources freely and by an open, transparent standards across several sovereign cloud implementations. We actually work upstream first, so we're contributing to various big giants like the Open Infra Foundation hosting the OpenStack project, to the Linux Foundation, and to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. We rely on that giants to actually build up an open source cloud and container stack with an open community embracing open operational knowledge. What has been achieved so far? We have released the third version of our reference implementation in September this year. We built a thriving community and the growing ecosystem around our open source project that enables public cloud providers to use the reference implementation to build services on top of that and to make the whole project actually usable and thriving. You can read on about our project on scs.community. We are very happy to join you, joining our community, to join the discussion, to join the technical teams and our community. And last but not least, please spread the word about open operational knowledge. That is highly important to build up transparent knowledge about operating large software stacks, and that it takes more for digital sovereignty than just embracing the legal dimension, but we also need open source, an open community, and open operational knowledge. Thank you for listening to this talk. I'm happy to open the discussion. Maybe some of you want to amend something to this talk, have a question, some feedback, so please speak up. Yes? There are actually we have the funding until the end of 24, and we will start discussion on how to actually make the project standing out after the funding in the next months. So there is no concrete plan yet, but getting hosted by the Eclipse Foundation is one of the possibilities we have already identified. Yes?
So you mentioned software as part of like digital sovereignty, but especially because you're apparently highly funded by the German government. What about hardware? If you don't have hardware which is to some extent free and available, we can't be sovereign.
Yeah. That's true. We also have covered the notion and the details about hardware sovereignty in the article I have linked here. So you can read more about our perspective for hardware sovereignty in the cloud report. Actually, yes, that's a problem. We are dependent on hardware manufacturers, but actually if you own a hardware platform, you actually own it. This does not always apply to the software stack, and while hardware is a commodity you can simply use and you have very good standards like x86, this does not apply to software stacks like cloud service offerings and so on. So we are aware of the problem of hardware sovereignty, but we are actually on the top layer of software. But I totally agree that we also have to embrace open hardware, open reference implementation of hardware, and open firmware for hardware to actually tackle this problem. Does someone else want to contribute to the discussion? Yes? Yes. Yes. Actually, even if the knowledge is freely available, you still need a man or woman power to actually apply that knowledge to something. And there surely will be companies that don't want to hire that knowledge or that power inside the company to perform and apply that knowledge. But And so this will still be a valid business model for many companies to actually consult and support companies that don't want to hire that power inside the company. But still, if the company has the power, we have still seen various cases that there was no knowledge, even if the engineers were inside the company. And this is a situation we need to actually fix. So we need to open source the knowledge about operating software and to foster a thriving community for operations.
You briefly mentioned that you contribute to a couple of foundations which are already existing.
Yes.
The ideas which you summarized here in the alliance is not new, right? It's basically the foundation of free software. But so you're contributing, but how many people are contributing to what projects in particular?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give some numbers? Do you know have some numbers regarding that?
I have no concrete numbers yet here on the stage, but I can surely send them to you. We have various companies that are contributing to OpenStack, for example, that are paid by the funding. So we try to contribute upstream. We are working on the upstream communities for OpenStack inside the CNCF ecosystem. And we do not fork and work on our own, but always trying to bring our contributions upstream, especially inside an OpenStack world, but also in the CNCF world.
Another question, is anybody of the German ministries or government bodies actually using that stack by themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Like using what they're preaching?
Yes, there is a big public IT provider, Dataport in northern Germany, that is hosting many services for public administrations, especially in the municipal sphere. That is actually investigating on Souverän Cloud Stack, has already ordered hardware and deployed Souverän Cloud Stack on that hardware, and will try to scale up that project for internal use. We are also part of the Deutsche Verwaltungscloud-Strategie and bringing our standards that we defined into the public sphere and embrace that standards for the German public cloud. So thank you all. If you still have questions or want to join the community, I'm here. Just speak up. We're happy to open the discussion. Thank you.